He shouldn't have sent that signal. Not here. Not where no one was supposed to understand it. The desert stretched wide and silent around the rest stop, a flat, endless sheet of sunburned earth broken only by a low concrete building and a flickering neon sign that hummed like it was tired of staying alive. It was just past 3:40 p.m., the kind of hour where heat clings to everything, where the air smells faintly of gasoline, dust, and something metallic you can't quite place. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A trucker nursed a cup of coffee in the far corner. A young couple sat by the window, whispering over a shared plate of fries. Behind the counter, a woman wiped the same spot over and over again, her mind somewhere else. And at the center booth, facing the door like instinct demanded, sat Staff Sergeant Caleb Hayes. He looked like a man built for structure, for rules, for clarity. Tall, broad-shouldered, his posture still carried the discipline of years in uniform. His short brown hair was neatly trimmed, though a faint line of gray had begun to show near his temples. His skin, sun-worn and pale beneath the dust of travel, told its own quiet story of long roads and longer nights. But it was his eyes that gave him away. A steady gray-blue, sharp, alert, and tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. The kind that lingers. The kind that watches every reflection in the glass and listens to every footstep twice. His right hand rested on the table, fingers still. For a moment, nothing moved. Then tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks against the surface. Barely audible. Almost nothing. No one looked up. Not the trucker. Not the couple. Not even the woman behind the counter. The sound dissolved into the low hum of the soda machine and the distant rumble of a semi passing by on Route 86. Caleb didn't react. Didn't look around. But his jaw tightened, just slightly, like a memory had brushed against him without permission. Outside, beyond the tinted glass, something shifted. 3 figures stood near the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt gave way to dust and scrub. German shepherds. No collars. No tags. Their coats carried the marks of time and distance. Dust clinging to their fur, ribs faintly visible beneath the surface. But their eyes were sharp. The largest one, a dark-coated male with a silvered muzzle, lifted his head. Rex. He didn't move at first, just watched. The second, a lean female with a sable coat, stepped forward half a pace, her ears twitching toward the building. Nova. And the youngest, restless, uncertain, shifted his weight from paw to paw, glancing between them as if waiting for permission. Scout. Inside, Caleb's fingers twitched again. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm. A code long buried beneath years of silence. A signal that wasn't meant for the world. Only for those who remembered. The wind outside carried the sound just enough. Not to human ears, but to something else. Rex's posture changed instantly. Not fear. Not curiosity. Recognition. Slow. Certain. Like a door opening in a place no one else could see. Nova's gaze locked onto the window, unblinking now. Scout froze mid-step, his uncertainty replaced by something steadier, something learned without ever being taught. Inside the diner, nothing had changed. The coffee still steamed. The neon still buzzed. Life moved on, unaware. But outside, something had already begun. The heat pressed heavier against the glass as the minutes stretched, the kind that made time feel slow and thick, like it had weight. Caleb did not turn his head, but his senses moved outward, measuring the room in fragments. The scrape of a chair leg across tile. The uneven rhythm of a soda dispenser struggling to keep up with the heat. The faint creak of the front door each time the wind nudged it from the outside. He had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It waited. It blended in. It breathed the same air as everyone else and trusted that no one was paying close enough attention. His fingers rested again on the table, still now, but not relaxed. Never relaxed. The code he had tapped was not meant to be repeated too often. Once was a question. Twice was a confirmation. A third time would mean something else entirely. Outside, Rex took a single step forward, slow and deliberate, his paws silent against the sun-warmed asphalt. Nova followed half a pace behind, her body low, her movement fluid, like water finding its path. Scout hesitated only for a moment before falling in line, his ears flicking back and forth as if trying to understand something he could feel, but not. Yet name. The 3 of them moved not like strays searching for scraps, but like something guided by memory, by instinct, by a thread that pulled tighter with every second. Inside, the door creaked open with a soft chime that barely rose above the hum of the room. A man stepped in, tall, composed, wearing a light gray shirt rolled at the sleeves and dark jeans that had not seen much dust despite the miles of road outside. His movements were calm, almost too calm, as if he had practiced them. He paused just long enough to scan the room, not in curiosity, but in calculation. Caleb felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like pressure building before a storm. He did not look up right away. Instead, he reached for the glass of water in front of him, lifting it slowly, giving himself a reason to observe through reflection rather than direct attention. The man chose a seat at the counter, 3 stools down from the register. Not too close, not too far. Close enough to watch without being obvious. The kind of distance that meant intention. Caleb set the glass back down without taking a sip. His throat was dry, but not from thirst. Outside, Rex stopped at the edge of the walkway leading to the entrance. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as the scent carried outward, a mix of heat, oil, and something sharper, something that did not belong. Nova's ears pinned back for just a fraction of a second before returning upright, her gaze fixed on the door as if she could see through it. Scout shifted again, but this time he did not look away. Something had changed. Inside, the woman behind the counter glanced briefly at the man in gray, offered a polite nod, then returned to her routine, unaware of the weight that had just entered the room. The trucker remained hunched over his cup, lost in his own world. The couple by the window laughed softly at something private, untouched by the tension threading its way through the air. Caleb's hand moved again. Not the same rhythm this time. Slower. More deliberate. Tap, pause, tap, tap. A variation. A message layered beneath the first. Not just a call. A warning. Outside, Rex reacted instantly. His body straightened, every muscle aligning with a purpose that had nothing to do with hunger or shelter. Nova shifted position, angling herself slightly to the side of the entrance, her eyes scanning the windows, the reflections, the spaces between movement. Scout lowered his stance, uncertainty giving way to something steadier, something learned without words. Inside, the man in gray finally looked up. His eyes moved across the room once more, slower this time, and then settled, just for a moment, on Caleb. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough. Caleb did not meet his gaze. He did not need to. The signal had been sent. And this time, something had answered. The silence did not break, but it shifted, like a floorboard settling under weight no one else could feel. Caleb kept his gaze lowered, fixed somewhere near the edge of the table where the laminate had begun to peel, but his awareness stretched far beyond that small detail, mapping every breath, every movement, every second that passed without resolution. The man at the counter had not ordered anything yet. That alone was enough. In a place like this, people came in for something, coffee, water, a moment out of the heat, but they did not just sit. Not like that. Not with shoulders relaxed and eyes that never quite stopped moving. Caleb's pulse remained steady, but there was a quiet tightening beneath it, a readiness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with memory. He had seen this before. Different place, different faces, same feeling, the kind that arrived before something irreversible. Outside, the sun dipped just slightly lower, shifting the light so it cut across the front windows at an angle, turning the glass into a dull mirror. Rex moved closer to the door, each step measured, his head level, his tail still, not a sign of aggression, but of purpose. Nova angled wider now, circling just enough to give herself a clear view of both the entrance and the long side windows, her ears catching every change in sound, every vibration carried through the ground. Scout followed, but this time there was no hesitation in him, only a growing steadiness, as if something inside him had clicked into place without needing explanation. Inside, Caleb's fingers hovered again over the table, not tapping this time, just resting, as though waiting for the exact moment when stillness would matter more than movement. His reflection in the window showed him more than the room did. The trucker shifted in his seat, unaware. The couple near the window leaned closer together, their laughter soft and distant, like it belonged to another world. And the man at the counter finally lifted his hand, not to wave, not to call for service, but to adjust something at his wrist, slow, deliberate, practiced. Caleb's eyes narrowed just slightly. A habit, a tell, something he had been trained to notice long before he ever knew why it mattered. The woman behind the counter approached him then, polite, routine, asking what he would like. The man offered a faint smile, one that did not quite reach his eyes, and answered in a voice low enough that most would not catch it. But Caleb did not need to hear the words. The tone was enough. Calm, controlled, too precise for someone passing through. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose, the kind of breath that steadied the body without drawing attention. Then, almost without thought, his hand moved again. Tap, tap, pause tap. The third signal. Not loud, not urgent, but final. Outside, Rex stopped completely, his body aligning with the doorway as if an invisible line had been drawn between him and something inside. Nova lowered her head slightly, her posture shifting from observation to readiness, every muscle coiled but quiet. Scout took one step forward, then another, his gaze locked on the glass as though he could see beyond it, beyond the reflections, beyond the ordinary surface of things. The wind carried a low hum across the parking lot, stirring dust along the edges of the pavement, but the dogs did not flinch. They had already chosen where to stand. Inside, the man at the counter turned his head just a fraction, enough to glance toward the door, toward the shapes beyond the glass. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his expression. Not surprise, recognition. And then it was gone, replaced by the same neutral calm. Caleb saw it in the reflection, not directly, but clearly enough. He did not move, did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The signal had changed things. Not in the room, not yet, but in the space between moments, where decisions are made before actions ever follow. Outside, Rex took one final step forward, placing himself directly in front of the entrance. Nova held her position at the flank, her eyes never leaving the windows. Scout settled just behind them, smaller, younger, but no longer uncertain. Together, they formed something unspoken, something remembered, something that had once belonged to a different place and a different time. Inside, Caleb's hand slowly curled into a loose fist on the table, his thumb brushing against the worn edge of a small metal tag hanging from a thin chain beneath his shirt. He did not look down at it. He did not need to. He already knew what it meant. Some signals are taught, others are carried, and some, no matter how long they are buried, are never truly forgotten. The light shifted again, softer now, stretching long shadows across the tile floor as the afternoon began its slow descent into evening. And with it came a subtle change in the air, the kind that did not belong to temperature or time, but to something unseen settling into place. Caleb felt it in the quiet space between breaths, the pause that lingers just a fraction longer than it should. The man at the counter finally wrapped his fingers around the coffee cup that had been placed in front of him, though he had not asked for it, and lifted it slightly, not to drink, but to hold, as if anchoring himself to something ordinary. His movements were still controlled, but now there was a faint hesitation beneath them, like someone recalculating a plan that no longer fit as cleanly as it once did. Caleb did not look directly at him, but the reflection in the glass told enough. The angle of the shoulders, the slight turn of the head, the awareness that had sharpened without becoming obvious. Outside, Rex stood motionless at the door, his silhouette framed by the fading light, a quiet sentinel where there had been none before. Nova shifted a few inches, just enough to catch a different angle of the interior, her gaze tracking not just movement, but intent. Scout lowered himself to the ground, not in submission, but in readiness, his body coiled with a calm he had not possessed moments ago. They did not bark. They did not scratch at the door. They waited. Inside, the woman behind the counter moved back toward the register, unaware of the quiet alignment forming just beyond the glass. The trucker finished his coffee and stood, stretching his back with a low sigh, his attention fixed on nothing more than the road ahead. The couple by the window gathered their things, laughter fading into casual conversation as they prepared to leave. Ordinary life, moving forward, untouched. Caleb watched them through the reflection, noting each step, each distraction, each narrowing of the room into something smaller, something more contained. Fewer people, fewer variables. The man at the counter set the cup down without taking a sip. His eyes flicked once more toward the door, toward the shapes outside, and this time the recognition did not fade as quickly. It lingered, faint but present, like a memory surfacing where it should not. Caleb felt the shift settle into certainty. Whatever this was, it had moved past chance. His thumb brushed again against the metal tag beneath his shirt, the edges worn smooth from years of contact. A small, constant reminder of a life that had never truly let go of him. He remembered the first time he had been taught the signal, not in a classroom, not in any formal setting, but in the quiet tension of a field exercise where silence mattered more than speed. 3 taps. Wait. 3 taps again. Not for communication. For survival. For the moment when words were no longer safe. Outside, Rex's ears twitched, catching something no human inside could hear, a subtle shift in breathing, in posture, in intention. Nova's stance tightened, her weight shifting forward just enough to signal readiness without movement. Scout's gaze never wavered, his earlier uncertainty now replaced by something steadier, something inherited without knowing its origin. Inside, the front door gave a soft creak as the couple pushed it open, stepping out into the heat, their voices trailing behind them, unaware that they had just passed between 2 worlds, one ordinary, one quietly holding its breath. The door swung closed again, sealing the room into a smaller, quieter space. Caleb finally lifted his eyes, not fully, just enough to meet the reflection of the man at the counter for a fraction of a second. It was not a challenge, not a warning, just an acknowledgement. The kind that says, I see you. The kind that changes everything without a single word. Outside, Rex did not move. Nova did not blink. Scout did not shift. And in that stillness, something invisible settled into place, like a line drawn not on the ground, but through it, separating what had been from what would follow next. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because everything inside it had drawn closer to a single point that no one else could see. Caleb did not shift in his seat, yet something in his posture changed, subtle enough to escape notice, but enough to align him with the moment that was forming. His breathing slowed, measured, deliberate, the way it had been trained to when uncertainty needed to be held, not chased. Across the room, the man at the counter let his fingers rest on the rim of the untouched cup, but his focus had moved entirely, no longer pretending to drift, now fixed with quiet precision. There was no rush in him, no outward tension, only a patience that suggested he believed time was still on his side. That was the mistake. Outside, Rex's gaze did not waver from the entrance, but his ears flicked once, catching a shift in tone from within, not words, but intention, the kind that travels beneath sound. Nova adjusted her stance again, stepping just slightly closer to the window, her reflection overlapping with the interior, as if she stood in both spaces at once. Scout remained low, but his body had settled into a stillness that was no longer uncertain. He was listening now, not with fear, but with something deeper, something inherited from the others, from a world he had not lived but somehow understood. Inside, the trucker reached for his jacket and moved toward the door, his boots heavy against the tile, each step echoing softly through the quiet. Caleb tracked him through the reflection, calculating without appearing to, noting the timing, the distance, the narrowing of space. The door opened with its familiar creak, letting in a breath of hot air that carried dust and sunlight into the room. Rex did not move as the man passed, but his eyes followed, not with interest, but with awareness, as if marking the boundary between those who belonged to the moment and those who did not. The door closed again, and with it, the room settled into a deeper silence. Fewer distractions now, fewer witnesses. The woman behind the counter turned briefly toward the back, reaching for something out of sight, her attention, drifting just long enough to leave the front of the room unguarded. The man at the counter noticed it too. Caleb saw the shift in the reflection, the slight lean forward, the narrowing of focus, the moment when intention begins to move toward action. It was not sudden. It was not loud. It was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb's hand slid slowly across the table, not reaching for anything, not signaling again, just repositioning, aligning with something internal, something already decided. His eyes lifted just enough to meet the man's reflection once more, and this time there was no ambiguity in it. No question, only recognition. Outside, Rex stepped forward, closing the final inches between himself and the door. Nova mirrored the movement from the side, creating a silent boundary that had not been there before. Scout rose to his feet, his hesitation gone completely now, replaced by a steady presence that matched the others. Together, they formed a line that did not block, did not threaten, but existed with purpose. Inside, the man at the counter exhaled slowly, as if acknowledging something had shifted beyond his control. His fingers tapped once against the cup, not a signal, not a code, just a habit, a break in his own stillness. Caleb noticed it. Small things mattered. They always had. The woman returned to the counter, unaware of the tension threading through the space she occupied. The hum of the machines continued, steady, indifferent. Outside, the wind stirred again, brushing against the glass, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and distance. And in that quiet, in that narrow space between what was seen and what was felt, something had already changed. Not in noise, not in movement, but in certainty, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that simply arrives and stays. Time did not move forward so much as it tightened, drawing every sound, every breath, every flicker of motion into a single fragile thread that could snap without warning. Caleb felt it in the way his chest rose and fell, slower now, quieter, as if even his breathing understood the need for restraint. The man at the counter shifted his weight slightly, just enough to ease the tension in his shoulders, but not enough to break the careful stillness he had constructed around himself. His eyes moved once more toward the door, toward the three silent figures beyond the glass, and this time there was no mistaking it. He understood that something was wrong. Not loud wrong, not obvious, but wrong in the way that cannot be explained, only felt. Outside, Rex held his position at the entrance, unmoving, his presence now less like a stray and more like something placed with intention. Nova's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, not in weakness, but in recognition, as if she had seen this moment before, in another place, under different skies. Scout stood fully upright now, his body no longer coiled with uncertainty, but balanced, steady, aligned with something greater than instinct alone. They were not waiting for a command. They were remembering one. Inside, the hum of the machine seemed louder than before, or perhaps everything else had grown quieter around it. The woman behind the counter glanced toward the door, noticing the dogs for the first time, her brow tightening slightly in confusion. Three strays standing so still, so focused, was not something the desert offered often. She hesitated, a dish towel in her hand, as if deciding whether to step outside or call someone. The moment stretched. Caleb saw it in the reflection. Another variable. Another thread in the fragile weave of what was unfolding. The man at the counter noticed it too. His eyes flicked briefly toward her, calculating, adjusting, the way someone does when a plan begins to shift beyond its original shape. Caleb's fingers pressed lightly against the table, not tapping, not signaling, just grounding himself in the present, in the exact second where everything still held. He remembered the training fields, the long hours where silence was not emptiness but language, where the smallest movement carried meaning, where survival depended on noticing what others ignored. He had not used those skills in years. Not like this. But they had not left him. They never did. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the dogs' coats, lifting small traces of dust into the air, but they did not react. Rex's eyes remained fixed forward, his focus unbroken. Nova shifted her weight once more, aligning herself with a new angle of the room, her awareness expanding, not narrowing. Scout took a single step forward, closing the distance between himself and the others, no longer trailing, now fully part of the line. Inside, the man at the counter reached into his pocket, slow, deliberate, his movements careful enough to appear ordinary to anyone not paying attention. Caleb saw it in the reflection, the slight change in posture, the subtle shift in intent. Not sudden, not rushed, but decided. Caleb did not move. His eyes remained steady, his body still, but something inside him settled into place, the last piece of a pattern finally understood. Outside, Rex's ears twitched sharply, catching the shift before it became visible, before it crossed into action. Nova's gaze hardened, her stance lowering just slightly, not aggressive, but ready. Scout's breath slowed, matching the rhythm of the others, as if guided by something unseen. Inside, the woman behind the counter took a step toward the door, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation, her hand reaching for the handle without fully understanding why. The man at the counter paused, just for a fraction of a second, his plan intersecting with something he had not accounted for. Caleb saw it. The hesitation. The fracture. It was small, but it was enough. Outside, Rex stepped forward at the exact same moment the woman's hand touched the door, his presence aligning with the opening, not forcing, not pushing, just being there, exactly where he needed to be. Nova followed the movement, adjusting her position with quiet precision. Scout held steady, watching, learning, becoming. Inside, the door began to open, letting in a thin line of sunlight that cut across the floor like a boundary being drawn. And in that narrow beam, between inside and outside, between intention and interruption, something shifted in a way that no one in the room could fully understand. No one, except the ones who had been listening all along. The door opened slowly, not with urgency, but with the quiet weight of something stepping into a moment it did not fully understand. A thin line of sunlight stretched across the floor, warm and sharp, cutting through the dim interior like a boundary that could not be seen but could be felt. The woman paused in the doorway, her hand still on the handle, her eyes falling immediately on the 3 dogs standing just beyond the threshold. For a second, she simply stared, confused, uncertain why they were not moving, not barking, not acting like strays at all. Rex did not step forward. He did not retreat. He held his ground with a calm that felt almost deliberate, his gaze steady, not on her, but past her. Nova shifted slightly, just enough to maintain her angle, her focus never breaking. Scout stood close behind, his body aligned with theirs, no longer the unsure follower, but part of something whole. Inside, the man at the counter stilled completely. The motion he had begun did not finish. His hand remained where it was, caught between intention and interruption. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, but in that pause, everything changed. Caleb saw it clearly in the reflection. The fracture had widened. The plan had slipped. Not broken, not gone, but no longer clean. The kind of disruption that forces a choice. The woman took a half step back, instinctively giving space to the dogs, her confusion deepening. "Hey there," she murmured softly, her voice uncertain, as if speaking louder might disturb something fragile. Rex's ears flicked once, acknowledging the sound without reacting to it. He was not here for her. None of them were. The wind moved again, brushing past the open door, carrying the scent of heat and dust into the room, mingling with the faint bitterness of coffee and the sterile hum of machines. It felt like 2 worlds overlapping, one ordinary, one something else entirely. Inside, Caleb's hand relaxed slightly on the table, not because the tension had passed, but because it had shifted into something steadier, something he could work with. He did not move to stand. He did not speak. He simply remained, exactly where he needed to be, letting the moment unfold the way it was now forced to. The man at the counter exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if recalibrating. His eyes moved once more, not toward Caleb this time, but toward the door, toward the dogs, toward the unexpected presence that had stepped into his path without warning. There was no fear in his expression, only recognition that something had altered the balance. Outside, Nova took one careful step closer to the doorway, her movement smooth, controlled, never threatening, but undeniable. Scout followed, matching her pace, his earlier uncertainty now completely replaced by quiet purpose. Rex remained where he was, the anchor, the point that did not shift. Together, they held the space without force, without sound, simply by being present. Inside, the woman glanced back over her shoulder, sensing something she could not name, her eyes moving between Caleb, the man at the counter, and the dogs outside. She did not understand the connection, but she felt the tension, the invisible thread pulling everything tight. Caleb finally lifted his gaze fully, meeting the man's eyes directly for the first time. No challenge, no aggression, just a calm, unwavering presence. The kind that says the moment has already changed, whether you accept it or not. The man held the look for a second longer than necessary, then looked away, his hand lowering slightly, the motion he had intended dissolving into nothing. Outside, the dogs did not celebrate. They did not move closer. They simply held their positions, as if waiting for something deeper than resolution. And in that quiet, in that narrow space between what almost was and what would now be, the room breathed again, not freely, but differently, as if something unseen had stepped in and gently turned the course of what was about to happen. The air inside the diner did not return to normal, not completely, but it loosened just enough for people to breathe without realizing they had been holding it. The woman slowly released her grip on the door, letting it rest open for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes still fixed on the dogs as if trying to understand what had just happened without having the words for it. Rex remained steady, his posture unchanged, but there was something softer now in the way he held himself, not less alert, but less tense, as if the line he had drawn no longer needed to be held as tightly. Nova eased her stance by a fraction, her gaze still sharp, but no longer searching for immediate threat, instead scanning with a quieter awareness. Scout blinked once, a slow, almost human gesture, before shifting his weight and taking a small step forward, closing the space between them and the threshold. Inside, the man at the counter sat back slightly, the invisible pressure around him easing, though not entirely gone. His hand, which had hovered moments before, now rested flat against the surface, empty, still. He looked down briefly, as if reconsidering something, then glanced again toward the door, toward the dogs, toward the interruption that had arrived without warning and changed the course of his thoughts. Caleb watched it all without moving, his eyes steady, his breathing even, but inside, something deeper had settled. Into place. Not relief. Not victory. Something quieter. The kind of understanding that comes when a moment passes not because it ended, but because it was redirected. The machines continued their low hum, the same as before, but now they sounded distant, like background noise to something more important that had already unfolded. The woman finally stepped back from the doorway, letting it swing gently toward a half-closed position, though she did not shut it completely. She glanced once more at the dogs, then at Caleb, her expression uncertain, as if she sensed a connection she could not see. Caleb gave no sign, no acknowledgement, just a calm presence that offered nothing and yet explained everything. Outside, the light had begun to soften into late afternoon, the harsh brightness fading into warmer tones that stretched across the parking lot and settled along the edges of the building. The wind slowed, carrying less dust now, more stillness. Rex turned his head slightly, just enough to check the others, a silent confirmation that needed no sound. Nova met his glance, then looked back toward the interior, her ears relaxed but attentive. Scout stepped forward another inch, then stopped, as if understanding that the moment had reached its edge. Inside, the man at the counter stood slowly, not rushed, not abrupt, but deliberate in a different way than before. His movements no longer carried the same intent. He placed a few bills on the counter, enough to cover a drink he never touched, and nodded faintly to the woman, who accepted them without question, still distracted by everything she could not quite explain. He walked toward the door, his steps measured, passing by Caleb without a word, without a glance this time. As he reached the threshold, he paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes flicking toward Rex, then Nova, then Scout. Not with challenge, not with fear, but with a quiet acknowledgement that something beyond his understanding had intervened. Then he stepped outside, into the fading light, and continued across the lot without looking back. The door eased shut behind him with a soft click, sealing the room once more. Caleb remained seated for a moment longer, his gaze drifting to the window, to the place where the dogs stood. Rex looked back at him, not long, just enough. Nova's eyes followed, steady and calm. Scout tilted his head slightly, as if memorizing something. And then, without signal, without command, they turned together and began to walk away, their forms blending slowly into the warm light of the desert evening, leaving behind nothing but the quiet certainty that some moments are guided not by chance, but by something that listens when no one else does. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full, as if something unseen had passed through and left behind a trace too subtle for most to notice, but impossible for some to ignore. Caleb remained seated, his hands resting lightly on the table, his posture unchanged, yet everything inside him had shifted. Not sharply, not dramatically, but enough. The kind of shift that only comes when a moment closes without breaking, when something that could have gone one way is quietly guided another. The light outside had softened into a deep amber, stretching long across the pavement, painting the edges of the world in warmth that did not quite reach the air. The heat lingered, but it had lost its edge, settling into something more forgiving. Through the glass, the last trace of the three dogs moved farther away, their shapes dissolving into distance, into light, into something that felt less like departure and more like completion. Caleb watched until they were no longer visible, until the space they had occupied returned to what it had been before, just empty asphalt, just fading day. But it was not the same. It would not be the same again. The woman behind the counter approached slowly, her footsteps careful, as if she did not want to disturb something that might still be lingering in the air. She stopped a few feet from Caleb's table, her brow slightly furrowed, her voice softer than before. "Those dogs, were they yours?" she asked, not with accusation, not even with curiosity, but with something closer to wonder. Caleb looked up at her, his eyes steady, carrying the weight of something he would not explain. He shook his head once, slow, simple. "No," he said quietly. And it was the truth. They were not his. Not in any way that could be owned or claimed. The woman nodded, though it was clear she did not fully understand. "They just showed up," she murmured, half to herself, as if saying it out loud might help it make sense. Caleb did not respond. Some things do not become clearer with words. She lingered for another second, then gave a small, uncertain smile, and turned away, returning to her routine. Though her movements were slower now, her attention divided between what was and what had just been. Caleb reached beneath his shirt and drew out the thin chain resting against his chest. The metal tag at the end caught the light briefly, worn edges reflecting years of contact, years of memory. He held it between his fingers, not studying it, not needing to read what was already etched into him. For a moment, he closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, not in relief, but in acknowledgement. Somewhere in the distance, a truck passed along the highway, its low rumble carrying through the still air, a reminder that the world continued, unchanged for most. Caleb opened his eyes again and let the tag fall back against his chest, the small weight settling into place like it always had. He stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape against the floor, and reached into his pocket to leave payment on the table, more than enough for what he had not touched. He did not rush. There was no need to. As he stepped toward the door, the room felt different now, not smaller, not larger, just clearer. The kind of clarity that does not explain itself, but stays with you all the same. He paused briefly at the entrance, his hand resting on the door, his gaze drifting once more to the parking lot, to the place where three figures had stood without being called, had acted without being asked. There was nothing there now. Only light. Only space. Only the quiet echo of something that had already passed. Caleb stepped outside, the warmth of the evening wrapping around him, the scent of dust and distant road rising to meet him. He stood there for a moment, just long enough to feel the air, to listen to the silence that followed him out. Then he turned, walking toward his truck at the far end of the lot, his steps steady, his posture unchanged, but something within him lighter, not because a burden had been lifted, but because it had been shared, even if only for a moment. As he reached the driver's door, he paused again, his hand resting on the handle, his gaze lifting toward the horizon where the sun dipped low, casting the desert in gold and shadow. He did not speak. There was no prayer, no words of thanks. Just a quiet stillness, a recognition that some things do not need to be understood to be believed. He opened the door, climbed inside, and started the engine, the familiar vibration grounding him in the present. As the truck pulled away from the rest stop, the road stretched ahead, long and open, carrying him forward into whatever waited next. Behind him, the building grew smaller, then smaller still, until it became just another shape along the highway. And somewhere beyond the reach of sight, three silent guardians walked their own path, unseen, unnamed, but never truly gone. Because some signals are not meant to be heard. They are meant to be remembered. And sometimes, when the world forgets how to listen, something else remembers for us.